12 grocery staples are vanishing from shelves right now as families scramble to load their pantries before the calendar flips to July. Food prices across America have surged over 30% in just a handful of years, and shoppers are waking up to an uncomfortable pattern. The fastest climbing price tags are not attached to ribeye steaks, lobster tails, or imported delicacies. Instead, they are hitting the humble everyday ingredients that appear in your kitchen morning, noon, and night. Summer's peak is barreling toward us, bringing heightened demand, brutal weather disruptions, and persistent bottlenecks in the supply chain that continue to rattle familiar products. Because of this, more households are choosing to buy now instead of gambling on tomorrow. Pay especially close attention to the item sitting at number 7 because its cost has shifted far beyond what casual shoppers realize. But the real jolt waits at the number 1 position. It is a food woven into millions of meals daily, yet its absence is rarely felt until it is suddenly gone from the cupboard. We begin with an item that costs pocket change but possesses the power to completely transform dozens of dishes. 12. Garlic. This tiny bulb rarely earns a spot on anyone's emergency shopping list before the month of June wraps up, but if it vanishes from your countertop, nearly every dinner you cook instantly loses its soul. People naturally fixate on grains, proteins, and dense canned goods that fight hunger. That strategy makes sense on paper. However, a hidden problem creeps in after a few days of eating purely from storage. Owning sufficient calories does not automatically mean owning a meal you genuinely crave. When your plate turns bland, monotonous, and stripped of aroma, the temptation to grab your phone and order expensive delivery becomes nearly impossible to resist. Garlic is the silent barrier that stops that collapse. A single bulb costing mere cents can revolutionize a simmering soup, a skillet of fried spuds, a tangled plate of noodles, a humble bean pot, or a tray of roasted poultry. It contributes negligible calories. It offers no meaningful protein, yet it tricks your brain into believing cheap ingredients have been crafted into a true feast. That is precisely why garlic deserves an inspection before June closes its door. Summer sparks a season of home grilling, fresh marinades, crisp salads, creamy pasta bowls, and potluck gatherings. Garlic weaves itself into so many recipes that the basket empties quicker than most cooks predict. Simultaneously, garlic pricing swings wildly based on crop yields, shipping fees, farm labor, and international import flow. Have you noticed how stealthy those price hikes feel compared to the loud headlines about eggs or ground beef? A frequent error is assuming garlic will always sit waiting at the market. Usually it does. But the real question is not whether a store somewhere stocks it. The question is whether it sits inside your own kitchen the exact moment you need it. Because the second this solitary ingredient goes missing, a cascade of other shelf-stable goods starts losing its magic. A sack of potatoes minus garlic grows tedious fast. Canned legumes without it taste like survival rations. Roasted chicken loses its signature perfume. Noodles feel like an unfinished narrative lacking its first paragraph. When you stock up, search for bulbs that feel rock solid, bone dry, and wrapped tightly in papery husks. Reject any that squish under pressure or sprout green shoots aggressively. Stash them in a dry, airy spot far away from suffocating plastic sacks and trapped humidity. A woven basket or mesh pouch vastly outperforms a sealed tub. Under proper conditions, garlic holds steady for many weeks and often stretches further. Garlic never makes a person feel like a tactical genius. It is simply too plain. But plain things are the engine that keeps a kitchen humming every single sunrise. Before the month concludes, do not only audit your rice or meat inventory. Ask a smaller yet deeply practical query. Do you own enough flavor to morph those raw materials into plates your household actually rushes to the table to eat? If uncertainty lingers, check your garlic supply first. 11. Potatoes. Here sits a food that marches onto the table during celebrations and equally during the harshest stretches of life. When bank accounts feel plump, we purchase it. When finances contract painfully, we purchase even more. that humble champion is the potato. Curiously, potatoes never steal the spotlight in a shopping cart. Nobody broadcasts a photo of a freshly bought bag of russets. But examine the homes that master their food budgets ruthlessly, and potatoes surface on repeat. The reasoning is brutally simple. Scarcely any other food can spawn as many distinct meals for such microscopic cost. As July breathes down our necks, utility bills inflate as air conditioners roar longer. Summer road trips pump prices and surprise bills start stacking up simultaneously. This is the precise moment families hunt for ingredients that stretch finite dollars while still making a dinner feel whole. Potatoes execute this task brilliantly. A 5-pound sack frequently costs roughly the equivalent of 2 cups of drive-through coffee, yet that same modest quantity yields a shocking number of portions. You can whip up buttery mashed comfort for supper, load baked spuds for the weekend, crisp up hash browns at dawn, or simmer a creamy potato soup on a chaotic weeknight. It remains one anchor ingredient that cycles through meal after meal without sparking boredom. That is why prudent families slide extra sacks into the cart before June expires, not out of fear that food will vanish, but because they know it represents the cheapest lever to bulk up pricier components. Potatoes do not rescue a budget merely by being affordable themselves. They save cash by making everything else travel twice the distance. A meager portion of ground meat feeds more mouths when spooned beside a mountain of mashed potatoes. Leftover roast chicken morphs into a fresh entree when paired with a steaming baked potato. Even a thin broth transforms into a filling stew once cubed tubers join the pot. Have you considered how often a simple potato has prevented you from ordering takeout without you even realizing it? Nutritionally, potatoes pack serious carbohydrate fuel, potassium, vitamin C, and a meaningful fiber punch when you consume the skin. A medium-baked spud suppresses hunger far longer than most doubters expect. If you intend to stock them, select firm specimens devoid of mushy indentations and not yet sprouting. Hide them in a shadowy, temperate, dry environment. A colossal blunder is tossing them into the refrigerator or nesting them beside onions. The moisture and gases exchanged between them accelerate rot dramatically. Potatoes may never strut like a glamorous food, but when budgets start screaming under the weight of summer costs, they are frequently the most precious asset sitting on the shelf. That reasoning alone plants potatoes firmly on the list of foods to snag before June wraps up. What is your go-to method for enjoying them? Silky mashed, crispy baked, hearty soup, or golden hash browns. 10. Evaporated milk. This is the can that lingers unnoticed until the moment of crisis. Not because it is scarce, not because it is costly, but because it waits so silently on the shelf that families blank on how indispensable it truly is. Imagine a sticky July sunrise. The coffee has finished brewing, a steaming bowl of oats rests on the counter, or a silky bisque is half finished on the burner. You swing open the fridge and confront a vacant milk carton. It is not a catastrophe, yet it is irksome enough to force a dedicated grocery run for one solitary item, and those emergency dashes almost never end with just milk. You march in aiming for one thing and march out clutching a receipt totaling far more than you planned. That is exactly why a can costing roughly a couple of dollars is worth its weight in gold. Unlike fresh dairy, evaporated milk stands guard on a shelf for 12 to 18 months before opening. When the need strikes, it pours into coffee, bakes into goods, enriches cream sauces, thickens chowders, smooths mashed potatoes, or rescues boxed mac and cheese. It does not fully clone fresh milk, but on frantic days it prevents recipes from collapsing into ruin. Many households grab a few extra cans before June draws to a close. Once July lands, children occupy the kitchen more often, breakfast demand spikes, backyard gatherings multiply, and refrigerators drain faster than anticipated. The most typical error is buying a can and then forgetting to rotate your stockpile. Burn through the older tins first, Slide the new ones behind them and keep everything in a cool, dry pantry. This small can will not make your storage shelf look impressive, but it will keep the morning brew drinkable, the soup finished, the potatoes creamy, and the dinner schedule intact. That is the quiet power of evaporated milk. 9. Walnuts. When grocery bills soar, shoppers instinctively slash what they label as premium luxuries, and walnuts frequently get the axe first. On the surface, that decision looks logical. A sack of walnuts costs more than a sack of rice or flour, but sharp shoppers do not stare solely at the sticker. They measure the nutritional density packed into every single serving. Walnuts rank among the most nutrient-concentrated items in the entire store. A tiny handful, roughly 1 ounce, delivers healthy fats, plant protein, dietary fiber, and precious omega fatty acids. For aging adults, this punch matters enormously because classic breakfasts often overflow with carbohydrates but run dangerously thin on quality fats. A scattering of crushed walnuts can utterly reinvent a dull bowl of oatmeal. They elevate yogurt, brighten salads, enrich banana bread, or serve as a rapid midday bite. You need very little. That fact is what makes them such a sharp buy. A small portion hauls a massive nutritional load. One motive to grab them before June ends is that nut harvests swing violently on weather chaos, freight expenses, and global demand. As summer deepens into its costliest phase, households start tightening belts, and tree nuts often get abandoned on the display rack. But here is the cruel twist. When folks ditch walnuts to pinch a few pennies, they may simultaneously be ditching the easiest route to upgrading their family's first meal of the day. If you are buying, hunt for unsalted or lightly salted kinds, particularly if sodium is a concern. Seal them in an airtight vessel tucked in a cold, shadowy spot. Better yet, stash them inside the refrigerator or deep freezer to stop those delicate natural oils from turning bitter. That is an astoundingly frequent error. Spending money on top-tier nuts only to stash them in a warm corner until their flavor sours dramatically. Walnuts are not the cheapest thing on this rundown, but not every brilliant purchase has to be the cheapest. Sometimes the wisest item to grab is the one that makes a basic meal deeply nourishing with merely a small handful. 8. Dry chickpeas. If any ingredient is quietly thriving amid climbing animal protein costs, it is the dried chickpea. For decades, these legumes were mostly framed as a niche Mediterranean staple. Today, practical families are eyeing them for a far more urgent reason. They help take the heat off a stretched grocery allowance. As ground chuck, poultry breasts, and familiar flesh proteins climb higher, shoppers hunt for alternatives that clamp down on hunger without launching the grocery bill into orbit. That is exactly where chickpeas enter the picture. A 1-pound sack of dried chickpeas often hovers between $1 and $2. Yet once soaked and simmered, that bag balloons into far more servings than a casual observer would guess. Chickpeas supply plant-powered protein, iron, fibrous bulk, and slow-burning carbs. They do not just plug a hole in your stomach, they make meals feel genuinely satisfying. You can blitz them into hummus, toss them into grain bowls, sink them into bubbling soups, mix them into rice pilafs, or roast them into a crispy snack that humiliates expensive packaged chips on cost. That versatility is exactly why they merit a look before June concludes. As July unleashes its full financial weight with cooling bills, fuel expenses, and travel costs, a bag of chickpeas sitting in storage can spawn several bonus meals without demanding another expensive protein purchase. Have you ever stopped to calculate how much a single meatless meal saves you compared to a drive-through run? The most frequent stumble is forgetting that dry chickpeas demand time. They are not a pop-top convenience food. Soaking them overnight before cooking yields far superior texture and slashes active kitchen time. If waiting is not an option, cook a giant batch at once, portion it, and freeze it flat for future chaos nights. Kept in a sealed container in a cool, dark, moisture-free environment, dry chickpeas retain their quality for an astonishing span of years. That shelf stability dwarfs anything in the fresh meat aisle. But the genuine muscle of chickpeas is not that they completely erase the need for meat. It is that they help you use dramatically less of it. A tiny pile of leftover roasted chicken can stretch across an entire family-sized salad when chickpeas join the bowl. A soup pot becomes far heartier without dumping in extra costly stew meat. In a moment when so many families are scrambling to cap spending before summer's busiest spending wave, that stretching power is a serious financial weapon. 7. Pure cocoa powder. Nestled on this list sits a product most shoppers barely glance at until the shelf sticker causes their eyes to widen in disbelief. Pure cocoa powder. Global cocoa markets have skyrocketed over 200% inside a relatively narrow window. At a quick glance, cocoa powder hardly seems essential compared to rice or potatoes. But when we talk about ingredients facing the most vicious price compression, cocoa powder is perched terrifyingly close to the peak. The headache originates far from domestic supermarket aisles. West African nations produce the lion's share of the globe's cocoa. Recent seasons have brought brutal heat, erratic rainfall, and aggressive crop sickness that have slashed harvests severely. As supply chains constricted, world cocoa prices detonated, briefly kissing levels multiple times higher than a few harvests prior. At first, shoppers did not feel the burn instantly, but inevitably the shockwave rippled into chocolate bars, candies, cocoa mixes, and pure powder tubs. That is why a lot of households may want to scrutinize this item before June slips away. Not because the shelf is about to empty, but because raw commodity spikes usually hit factory gates first and retail stickers chase them up later. A container of pure powder often runs between $5 and $10 depending on brand heft and size. It may not be a daily driver, but it threads itself into so many nostalgic recipes. Steaming hot cocoa, fudgy baked treats, morning oats, blended shakes, festive desserts, and homemade fudge sauce. The critical step is selecting the correct product. Hunt for 100% pure cocoa powder, not sugary hot chocolate blends. Sweetened mixes might appear cheaper initially, but a huge chunk of that cost is buying you spoonfuls of sugar and filler rather than actual cocoa solids. The classic mistake is leaving the powder exposed near steam or failing to seal the lid tightly. Humidity spawns clumps, murders aroma, and degrades quality far ahead of schedule. Secure it in a tightly fastened container tucked in a cold, dark, arid pantry. Cocoa powder is not the kind of food that fills a belly. It is the kind of food that preserves a layer of emotional comfort when everything else in the budget feels razor thin. A spoonful stirred into a bowl of oats or a mug of warm evening cocoa can make a strained kitchen feel far gentler. And if cocoa price trends continue marching onto retail shelves, grabbing a single container before the month ends could prove far smarter than many people currently assume. 6. Apple cider vinegar. There is a bottle on this list that delivers almost 0 calories, will never silence hunger pangs, and absolutely cannot stand in for a meal, yet it helps other foods survive longer. That is apple cider vinegar. If there is a silent leak draining money from your household, it is food that rots before it ever reaches your mouth. A bag of wilted spinach pushed behind the milk jug, cucumbers turning to mush in the crisper, a few onions shriveling on the counter. Individually, these losses seem trivial, but stacked across 12 months, countless households incinerate hundreds of dollars simply through spoilage. That is the exact reason apple cider vinegar secured a slot on this rundown. A bottle usually costs between $3 and $6, yet it performs a startling array of kitchen jobs. It fuels tangy salad dressings, quick pickles raw vegetables in minutes, cuts through heavy food odors, and assists in extending the life of certain fruits and produce during prep and storage. Right now is the perfect moment to audit how much vinegar you actually have on hand. As July arrives, families flood their kitchens with fresh produce for cookouts and picnics. That is also the exact window when food waste numbers skyrocket. What is particularly fascinating is the nearly eternal shelf life of apple cider vinegar. Kept sealed and stored in a cool, dark spot, a bottle holds its quality for ages. Even if natural strands of sediment form or the hue shifts slightly, the utility remains largely untouched. The biggest misread is pigeonholing it as just another salad dressing component. In reality, its largest contribution is not what it adds to a dish. It is what it stops you from tossing into the garbage can. Some groceries save money by generating more portions, some by keeping you sated longer. Apple cider vinegar operates on a different frequency. It helps ensure the food you already paid for actually crosses your lips. And at a moment when grocery prices tower far above where they sat just a few years ago, that might be the stealthiest saving instrument in your entire culinary arsenal. 5. Frozen fruit. If there is one sprint most grocery buyers ultimately lose, it is the race against fresh produce decay. You pick up a carton of strawberries intending to eat cleaner. You grab blueberries to crown your breakfast. You snag a bunch of bananas for smoothies. For the initial couple of days, everything clicks. Then life piles on. A few containers migrate to the rear of the fridge and vanish from memory. By the time the weekend arrives, the fruit has turned soft, shriveled, or is heading straight for the disposal. How many families never truly tally the cash they hemorrhage this way? That is why frozen fruit has evolved into such a razor-sharp buying choice. Unlike its fresh counterparts, frozen fruit gets flash frozen at peak ripeness. After that moment, it can camp in your freezer for months without any pressure to use it immediately. You do not lie awake worrying that it will spoil by tomorrow morning. You do not have to scramble your meal plan because a clamshell of berries is about to collapse into mush. That is the fundamental superpower of frozen fruit. You are not necessarily buying it because it is cheaper per ounce. You are buying it because it grants you the luxury of time. A bag of frozen mixed fruit can plunge into a sunrise smoothie, a steamy bowl of porridge, a cup of yogurt, or transform into a simple evening dessert. When you can scoop precisely what you need and shove the rest back into the freezer, the risk of waste craters dramatically. That is why savvy kitchens load up before June draws to a close. July and August are notoriously the months where fruit consumption peaks and simultaneously where the most fruit hits the trash bin. The most stubborn myth is that frozen fruit is nutritionally hollow compared to fresh. In reality, many types are frozen within hours of leaving the field, locking in their vitamin and mineral content tightly. Frozen fruit might not spark joy as you push the cart, but it offers a guarantee fresh fruit often breaks. You are not racing the clock to use it. And when food stays out of the trash, the dollars you spent to acquire it stay out of the trash too. 4. Parmesan cheese. Something peculiar unfolds when households begin tightening their financial belts. The first casualties are usually ribeye steaks, shrimp platters, and restaurant outings. Yet there is one ingredient that stubbornly remains in the cart far longer than logic would dictate. Parmesan cheese. Initially, this seems illogical. An 8-ounce tub often commands a price between $6 and $12. Pound for pound, it outpaces many other grocery items in sheer cost. So why do careful spenders keep buying it? Because Parmesan is not mentally categorized as mere food. It is viewed as a small strategic investment that rescues simple cooking from mediocrity. This is a truth many only discover once the budget begins squeezing tight. One container can sprinkle across 20 to 30 separate plates. A dusting on spaghetti, a flurry over minestrone, a shake onto roasted vegetables, a layer on a dinner salad. The per-use cost often sits in the penny range, yet the eating experience feels utterly transformed. That is why seasoned households do not classify Parmesan as a frivolous luxury. They categorize it as the final comfort worth retaining, particularly before July arrives. This is the season when road trips, backyard barbecues, and unplanned bills start flooding in. As more families commit to cooking at home, ingredients that inject flavor without demanding additional meat become priceless. Unopened Parmesan can sleep soundly in the refrigerator for ages. Once the seal is cracked, most styles remain perfectly usable for 4 to 8 weeks. One clever tactic many home cooks deploy is dividing the block or shreds into smaller parcels and freezing them. Frozen Parmesan preserves its flavor quality for extended periods with almost zero negative impact. Parmesan will not bulk up your emergency reserves. It will not stretch your total food poundage for weeks. But when budget dinners start cycling onto the table with greater frequency, it might be the single ingredient that keeps those plates worth anticipating. And that subtle power is exactly why people keep tossing it into the cart long after other luxuries have been cut. 3. Canned tomatoes. Let us run a mental experiment. Swing open your pantry and mentally empty its contents. Then interrogate yourself. Which single item can be shapeshifted into the largest variety of distinct suppers? For a staggering number of home cooks, the answer lands squarely on canned tomatoes, not because they taste the sweetest, not because they cost the least, but because so many recognizable meals begin their journey inside that red-labeled can. A 28-ounce can usually sets you back around $2 to $4. Yet from that solitary container, you can launch a pasta sauce, a spicy chili, a vegetable soup, tangy sloppy joes, bubbling casseroles, flatbread pizza sauce, and a dozen other dinner directions. That level of versatility is something precious few foods in the grocery aisles can match. It is not the meal itself, it is the launch pad. It is worth noting that over 90% of America's processed tomatoes flow out of California. That concentration means droughts, fuel spikes, labor crunches, and freight snarls can directly punch future pricing. That is a major reason families like to snag a few extra cans before June wraps. Not because they fear barren shelves, but because they understand that as long as a can of tomatoes sits in storage, the ability to forge a rapid dinner still exists. Regarding shelf stability, most canned tomato products carry a best-by dating window of 18 to 24 months. Many stay in excellent shape even beyond that when stored in a cool, dark pantry. One elegantly simple but intensely powerful habit is maintaining a floor of at least 4 to 6 cans at all times. Because when the refrigerator is bare and motivation is low, a can of tomatoes holds more culinary value than many foods that cost triple its price. It can merge with noodles, with legumes, with ground meats, with grains, with garden vegetables, with nearly anything lingering in the shadows of your kitchen. That is why canned tomatoes are far more than just another ration. They are the ignition switch for dozens of unique dinners. Before June comes to an end, give your pantry an honest glance. If your stock has dwindled to 1 or 2 lonely cans, it is likely time to reinforce those ranks. 2. Bouillon cubes or beef stock base. Picture the final days of the month. The refrigerator is hauntingly empty. A handful of carrots, a solitary onion, a container of beans, some leftover boiled potatoes. At a glance, nothing special resides there. But individuals who have logged years behind the stove recognize that introducing just one tiny element can fuse those scraps into a cohesive dinner. That element is bouillon. Among everything on this list, this may be the most physically tiny item. A box frequently costs merely $2 to $5, such a trivial sum that many shoppers drift straight past it without a second thought. Yet here is the startling reality. One box can frequently yield 25 to 30 cups of broth. That is nearly 2 full gallons of flavor foundation. The resulting cost per cup can plunge as low as 10 pennies. Almost no other product in the grocery landscape can deliver that magnitude of value from such a minuscule investment. That is why smart households perpetually keep a box or two lying in wait, not because they predict apocalyptic food shortages, but because they grasp a simple and profound truth. Ingredients and meals are not identical things. A bowl of plain steamed rice is technically food. A pot of boiled legumes is food. A pile of chopped veggies is food. But the moment quality broth enters the scene, those isolated ingredients begin morphing into a meal. One cube can slip into a rice pot, a soup cauldron, a simmering stew, a batch of creamy potatoes, or a slow cooker. Minutes later, the entire house smells like a legitimate dinner is in progress. That is a magic trick many cooks only fully appreciate once their supply runs dry. As for longevity, most bouillon products maintain peak quality for 1 to 2 years, often considerably longer when kept bone dry and cool. One frequent tactic is to purchase extra when it goes on deep discount and stash it in the pantry. It occupies almost zero spatial footprint, yet it stands perpetually ready to serve. Some foods assist in stretching supplies, some foods trim your budget. Bouillon accomplishes a different mission entirely. It makes the food you already possess genuinely worth eating. And that precisely explains why a small box costing only a couple of dollars merits a placement near the very peak of this list. 1. Onions. The most critical food occupying your kitchen may be completely different from what you are picturing. Not ground beef, not poultry, not sacks of grain, not any specialized emergency ration. It is the ingredient multitudes forget to purchase until they have exhausted their last layer. Onions. Nobody struts out of a grocery store feeling a thrill about a mesh sack of yellow onions. They are too familiar, too mundane, too easily ignored in the shadow of pricier proteins. But chew on this figure. The average American consumes roughly 20 pounds of onions each calendar year. That statistic crowns onions as one of the most universally deployed vegetables in American cookery. The reasoning is remarkably basic. Onions are everywhere. They form the aromatic bedrock of chili, meatloaf, burgers, pasta gravies, pot roast, casseroles, taco fillings, and dozens upon dozens of other dishes. What is fascinating is how few people recognize the gravitational importance of onions until they swing the pantry door open and discover the bin is vacant. That is the precise moment a food costing only a couple of dollars for a whole bag suddenly feels more precious than many foods priced far steeper. A 3-pound sack usually contains 8 to 12 orbs. Those orbs can thread themselves into a vast array of meals, not as the starring act, but as the essential supporting character that makes the star function. That distinction makes all the difference. A pot of chili can technically be executed without onions, yet it usually will not taste the way your memory insists it should. A soup kettle is still soup without them, but that familiar savory depth collapses away. Onions function similarly to a home's foundation. You almost never notice the concrete slab, but you perceive the disaster immediately if it cracks. They additionally rank among the highest value per dollar foods in the store. Kept in a shadowy, arid, properly ventilated corner, many types can persist for weeks and often months before softening. One absolutely vital storage directive is to isolate onions from potatoes. The humidity and gases exchanged between the two will accelerate decay on both sides alarmingly fast. As July barrels in, many households shift focus onto larger line items like gasoline, cooling expenses, and seasonal recreation. But what is worth heavy contemplation is that the best functioning kitchens are seldom constructed atop the priciest ingredients. They are constructed atop the most ordinary ones. And there may be no ingredient more ordinary nor more vital than the onion, because ultimately, the number one spot on this list is not claimed by the food that helps you eat more. It is claimed by the food that helps dozens of other meals exist in the first place. After walking through all 12 staples, the most thought-provoking insight might be this. The foods that truly carry a family through turbulent seasons are rarely the most opulent ones. Sometimes it is simply a sack of onions, a flat of canned tomatoes, or a compact box of broth tucked silently in the corner of your pantry. Because when you strip everything down, the genuine value of sustenance is not quantified by the volume you hoard. It is measured by whether you can still place a familiar, reassuring meal on the table when prices inflate, calendars tighten, or life tosses you a sudden curveball. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you. Out of the 12 items we broke down today, which one do you personally make sure never runs out in your kitchen? Drop your answer in the comments section. And please remember to tap the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next video.